This is how I do it. This is my approach. Does not mean it's the best. Doesn't mean that it's the one you should use. It means it is the way I go about it, and it works for me. Whatever works for you is what you ought to do. Number one, and very important, not all sandpaper is created equal. And all of you who have sanded any at all know the truth of that. And those who go out and buy sandpaper at bargain prices usually wind up getting just what they paid for. My favorite sandpaper is Red Rhino. It's a Portugal sandpaper. Super Grit carries it. It's a P grade, and I'm not going to go into all the different grades stand for. In sheet sandpaper, it is all I use anymore. I've bought the Japanese, I've bought the Chinese, I bought the Portuguese, I bought all of them. This one works best for me. It doesn't load, at least it doesn't load a lot. It lasts reasonably well, if that is important to you. So you buy the best sandpaper that you can afford, and then you turn around and use it as if someone else is buying it. A mistake I think sanders make is trying to get too much distance out of their sandpaper. And I used to do that. I thought, man, here's a sheet of sandpaper that I paid $3 for. You know, I'm going to make this last till I get my $3 out of it. Is it important? You know, maybe I should have begun by saying, is it important to sand? For me, it is vitally important. It is maybe the most important part of the whole process for me. And I will tell you, in my experience, I have never seen what I would consider a gallery quality piece that was not sanded. Now, you will talk to turners who will tell you, well, you know, I'm good enough at turning that I can begin sanding with 220 grit paper. Bull feathers. There is no such thing. Not if it's going to be well sanded. So you start with the grit that is required to do the job. And I'll show you a little something about that here in a couple minutes. Another important issue to consider is when tolerances are critical, you have to allow enough wood for sanding. Particularly important if you're making boxes or if you're making things that fit together. Because one of the problems that you will run into, you make something and it fits perfect. Now you're going to sand it, and it no longer fits perfect. Because sandpaper is a turning tool. It removes wood. And so you remove the wood, and that perfect fit is no longer a perfect fit. So if you are going to sand the portion where the fit is, where the two pieces come together, if you're going to sand that, some people don't. I don't always, although I do most of the time. Then you have to leave a little wood for sanding, and you have to do your final fitting during the sanding process. Okay? If you're sanding on a lathe with the lathe running, it works better at slower speeds as opposed to higher speeds. Because what you want is for the sandpaper to cut the wood. You don't want to burnish the wood. You don't want to burn the wood. I generally sand, if I'm power sanding, I generally sand between 800 and 1,000 RPMs. Somewhere around that. Sometimes even slower than that, depending. I never, almost never, ever go above 1,000 RPMs if I'm sanding either by hand or if I'm power sanding. Okay? With the lathe running, the most efficient places to sand are at 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock. In other words, it doesn't work as well to sand up here. 12 o'clock. It works best between 5 o'clock, and of course, only if you're power sanding can you stand at 7 o'clock. You don't want to put your hands over there if you're sanding by hand. If you're sanding by hand, you want to stay on this side, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. When hand sanding, I always fold the sandpaper 3 times. The reason for that is to, first of all, keep my hands from burning. So I cut my sandpaper for hand sanding, 3.5 by 4.5. And I do that, and we're going to talk about this stuff here in a little bit, so I won't get into that right now. I fold it thus and thus. Okay, the long way. Now, I may not need that much sandpaper for what I'm going to work on, so I simply cut it, and I have 2 pieces. And that one, well, what do I do with this? I can't put it back in my little index box here that has all my different grits in, so I simply put it over here in a little box I made that fits on the ways of the lathe. And I may not use the whole thing because I now have 3 sanding surfaces. I have this one, and this one. So I have 3 sanding surfaces. I'm protecting my hands from the heat because I have insulated it with 3 folds of sandpaper. If with 3 folds of sandpaper you still burn your hands, you're doing a couple of things wrong. You're running the lathe too fast, you're pressing too hard, or you're just, I don't know. You're doing something wrong. Okay? I noted on here that you ought to watch your hands when you're turning, when you're sanding with the lathe turning, because it hurts to get hit by wood when it's turning on the lathe, particularly if it's irregular wood or if it's sharp wood. It hurts, it cuts, it makes you bleed, it makes you groan, it can break fingers. I have fortunately never broken a finger, but I have cut myself beautifully, and there's no cut like the cut from a sharp edge on a piece of wood. I mean, that is worse than a paper cut. And you know how paper cuts are. Okay? When you're sanding, do not skip grits. If you start with 80, your next grit is 100. Your next grit is 120. And so on and so forth. And you have to go through every one. Because if you sand with 100 and you go to 180, you're never going to remove the marks that 100 left. You can sand from now till the Monday after never, and there will still be marks there. You need to use every grit, and as you go through the grits, make sure that the marks from the previous grit have gone. Now, there'll be new marks from the new grit. They'll be smaller, finer, less visible. As you keep going down through the grits, you will eventually remove them. Okay, the last grit I have noted on here, whether it be 400, whether it be 2,500, whether it be 12,000. The last grit is best done by hand with the lathe stopped with the grain when possible. Okay? Always remove dust between every grit. That's what these things are for. You go to the art shop. Well, these from Craft Supply you can buy. Look at the dust coming out. From Craft Supply you can buy these little basting brushes, which make great dusting brushes. But I would recommend that you go to the art store and you buy yourself a good badger hair brush. And if you buy a good one, it will last a long, long time. I've been using this one about 15 years, and it's almost done. The bristles are down to the point where it's no longer really soft. So I'm going to have to bite the bullet and reinvest in a new one. And I like these round brushes about that size, and the bristles were probably about that long 15 years ago, or maybe a little bit longer. And I can get the dust off from the previous grit with that very well.
Compressed air.
Beg pardon?
Compressed air.
I didn't hear you, Jim.
Compressed air.
Yeah, oh yeah, compressed air, but here, let's go to the next one. Protect your lungs. We will have a testimony here to this. Over time, inhaled dust is accumulative in the damage it does. You can get away with it for years, but it will eventually catch up with you if you don't do something to keep from inhaling the dust. Now, compressed air, I use compressed air, but compressed air blows the dust all over everywhere. If I have my dust extractor here, with this I can get most of the dust into the dust extractor. But when you're sanding, unless you're doing a demonstration, you have got to wear some kind of protection for your lungs. You have a number of choices. The best choice, in my opinion, is the powered respirator. I shouldn't say it's the best choice. It is the most comfortable choice. It is the easiest to breathe. And there are basically two that are worth your consideration. The one is the 3M, the Darth Vader in white helmet, and it's probably, beyond a doubt, the best powered respirator on the market. There are two drawbacks. It is frightfully expensive, and you need a battery bearer when you're using the thing. Because if you've stuck that battery in the pocket of your smock, after about 2 hours, it feels like it weighs 100 pounds, because it's a big old rascal. The second best, in my opinion, is the Trend Pro. That one has the battery in the helmet, and it is very comfortable. I'm not sure it is quite as efficient. But you don't have to go that way. You can use good commercially available masks. Now, of the disposable ones, I have no doubt that this one is the best of the disposable ones. And I can't tell you much about it. I'm sure Bill Fordney can. I got it from him. And they came from somewhere. They are, it's a P95 NOSHA rating. It is very, very good. It's a little hard to breathe in it, but it is very good. I have used these for a sanding operation from complete start to finish. Have not been able to blow any dust or dirt out of my nose at all. So it's a good one. You're all familiar with this, and these aren't bad. I'm not sure that they're and especially after they're used a while. Now, what you do with these is you wash them to clean them, and these things are about $40 now or something like that. And so they're not certainly giving them away. And you can wash it, and it fits your face. The nice thing about this is it's a good thing to wear if you're doing demonstrations or things like that, because it's easy to talk while you're wearing it.
It's called a dust be gone.
Dust be gone.
Dust be gone. And,
Yeah, yeah.
even after you wash it, you can
Yeah.
put it right on too.
The half mask with the replaceable filter is also an option for protecting yourself against dust. This one I particularly like. I have another. Highland Hardware ran a special on these, and that's where you get them. It's light, it's small, and it's light, and it's very comfortable, and it has a replaceable filter, and it does a pretty good job. And then, of course, there is the Lowe's Special. And the Lowe's Special will work all right if you fit it to your face properly. Put it on your face, bend this to fit your nose, get the straps comfortable so that you have a good tight fit, and they work very well. The only thing about it here again, don't overuse them. Once it's dirty, that's why they're called disposable. You dispose of them when it comes time to dispose of them. You really need to wear something, unless you're turning very wet wood. Sometimes you have very little dust, or unless you're turning wood wet, which I do often, and I will talk to you about that in a few minutes if I remember. 14. I always get a chuckle when I am 14. When I tell people they should learn to enjoy sanding. Most everyone hates sanding. Not everyone, but most everyone. I can generally go through a display of wood turnings and tell you which turners enjoy sanding and which turners don't, because it's obvious in their work. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you're striving to be better, if you want to get better, learn that sanding is just a normal part of the process, and you should go about it with the same enthusiasm as you go about the turning. It may not be as much fun as the turning, but you can learn. That's when I turn the tunes up. When I get to the sanding stage, and get some nice classical music going, or something like that, and I can just rock right on through. How much should you sand? Only you can answer that question. You sand to the grit that does what you're trying to accomplish. Generally, I can sand to 400 and be happy. But I sometimes go to 3,500, which is a brown paper bag. And sometimes I go even beyond that. Rarely do I go beyond 2,500, 3,500. And I don't always go that far. Wet sanding is good in that it does reduce dust, and there are some other advantages, and I often wet sand even a piece that is dry. So with that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the well-dressed sander wears. Okay? The well-dressed sander has a supply of lung protection devices. The well-dressed sander has good light. Now I use, this is my traveling light. This one isn't as good as some I have at home. But when you're getting down to the finer grits, these things are cool. Harbor Freight, maybe, I don't know, maybe $12, something like that. You wear it on your head, and you can make this thing look wherever you want it to look. And when you're really looking for how you're doing, this thing works very well. It's an LED, and it gets really bright, and you can see where your scratches. Oh, and it also has an emergency in case your plane is down or you made a gear up landing out in the field somewhere. You can turn that on and you can get help. I will guarantee you, in a gallery, the first thing a potential buyer is going to do is examine up close the finish on your work. I guarantee it. They're going to look at it in general. They're going to turn it over and look at the foot. They're going to look at this part. And that had better be as well finished as the rest of your piece, or they're not going to buy it. Okay? If you're power sanding, generally, you use hook and loop sandpaper. And hook and loop sandpaper is expensive. The little discs are expensive. There is a way around that. There's a way to soften the pain of that. There's a tramadol for sandpaper. And I use that term with some knowledge because I have been taking tramadol now for a while. In fact, I'm getting scared because tramadol, you know, is synthetic opium. Most of you know I had this whole thing cut up in here and repaired, and it hurts. It hurts. Hook and loop sandpaper sanding discs are round. My question for you is, why are they round? And do they have to be round? Absolutely not. They can be square. And if they can be square, and they can work very well. 2 1/4 inch square for a 2-inch disc holder. Why that? So that you have some sticking over each end. I haven't used a true 2-inch sanding disc on a 2-inch sanding disc holder for probably 10 or 12 years. I always use oversized ones. There's a company in Reading, Pennsylvania, of all places, called Industrial Abrasives. And they sell hook and loop sandpaper 2 ways. They sell it in half sheet size, which makes you 8. You mark them off like that in the back, okay? You lay it down on an old board, put a ruler against it, and cut it with a utility knife. And you get really, really nice little squares. Now, that's very economical because you get exactly 8 out of here. Now, if you're going to use the 3-inch pads, then you need 3 1/4 inch square, and now this won't work. But they also sell this in 36-inch square sheets, big ones. You need some room to work with it, but you can make your 3 1/4 inch ones very nicely with that. Now, what are you going to hold them with? Well, you're going to hold them.
Larry, can I make a comment, please? First place, you can cut them. I use, I don't know what correct nomenclature is, but a paper cutter. You know what I mean? I do that all the time, what you're saying.
You can,
and
sure.
Also, by the way, they sell them as super grit, what you're talking about, the sheets of sandpaper. Just let you know that.
This?
Yeah, because I buy them from there.
You buy from Super Grit, same way. I always bought from Industrial Abrasives. I have nothing against, I buy sandpaper. I buy all my red rhino from Super Grit. So, okay, you can cut them with a paper cutter. I don't. I use a utility knife, and I've gotten it down to the point now that I just cut up a bunch of them, and then I'm good to go. What are you going to hold them on? You have a lot of choices on what to hold them on. A lot of choices. You can pay anywhere from $9.95 to around $24 for something to hold them on. This is the high-end model. This is the Lamborghini. They are made in Australia. They are made in Australia, and they are by far the Cadillac of the sanding disc holder. And you will wear out a dozen $9.95 jobs before you wear out one of these. The one that's on the drill up there, I've been using for probably a year and a half, maybe more, and it still holds very well. They also make them in the 3-inch size, on which I use a 3 1/4 square, and the reason so that I have some out over the edge. Now, when it comes to these, you're out of luck because they don't make these. This company does not make a soft one, and you're going to have to bite the bullet and buy the cheapie, because you've got to have a soft one or two around. There are times when you just simply can't get around the corner with this, even though you're using oversized paper. So you've got to have something like this. What do you drive it with? You drive it, obviously, with an electric drill. Here again, there are some things you ought to look out for. It doesn't have to have a large chuck capacity. 1/4 inch, which is what this one is fine to hold these little things. I use this drill only for sanding. I happen to be partial to Milwaukee in this case, and I've been using this drill for 5 years or close thereto. Now I blow the dust out of it every time after I'm finished. The thing to look for when you're getting a drill is that you have room here for your hand, because a lot of drills are made where the chuck sits right back on the body of the drill and you're holding it back here where it's uncomfortable trying to sand. You need a place where you can hold it in your hand, and that's important. How fast should the drill turn? Doesn't really matter, because this one happens to go up to 2,500 RPMs. That doesn't mean I always run it that fast, but you can always compensate for a slower turning drill if you need to by turning the speed of your lathe up a little bit. You can always adjust that so that you're actually sanding the wood and not burnishing it. There are times, for the sander who has everything, you might want to consider a close quarter drill. This is a Sioux, which is incidentally Milwaukee, just another name for Milwaukee. And this makes it possible sometimes to get in places where you wouldn't otherwise be able to get in. Okay. Every well-dressed wood turner has at least 2 forceps. You have a curved one and you have a straight one. And we'll try and give you a little and it's very obvious what you do with them. I don't need to give you any instruction. Oh, incidentally, buy yourself a good pair of scissors. The surgical style is best, but don't buy them from Harbor Freight. I have nothing against Harbor Freight. I buy a lot of things from Harbor Freight. When you're buying these, go to the drugstore and get a pair of surgical bandage scissors like this that cut really good. I've been cutting with these forever, because when you're cutting sandpaper, you're hard on scissors. So here we've now reduced that even more, and we've folded that double like that. And we take our forceps and we grab on there like that. And now we can go down in a little narrow opening where we don't really want to put our fingers, and where we should not put our fingers. And we can keep our fingers out of there. One word of caution. You don't hold them like this. Please don't hold them like this. Because if they catch on something, these two fingers are going to get broken. You hold them like this. And then if it catches on something, it pulls it out of your hand. Now, I've never had a serious catch on something with these. But sometimes they will chatter and jump on you when you're down in the bottom trying to take that little nubbin that you just couldn't get off, with the scraper or the shallow grind bowl gouge when you went around there. You discover you still have a little sanding to do. This is how I do it. Okay. You also make or buy a mandrel with a slot in it. And what you do with that is you cut your sandpaper in thin strips, half-inch strips in this case, and you slide a bunch of them on there. Then you wrap it around, put it in your drill, wrap it around like that, put it in that little, you're doing a David Ellsworth holoform. And you have an opening that big. And you can actually get in there and do some sanding. I'm not saying you can do, really, really good sanding, but you can clean it up. So that when your customer takes their pen light and looks down in there to see if there's, if you've actually done any finishing inside, you can honestly tell them you do. You also need one of these, quick change job. These are inexpensive. And the reason you need this is because you're going to put this in here like this sometimes, and you're going to stick it in your headstock. And you're going to finish the foot of pieces on here without having to, sand. Sometimes the foot's so small you can't do that. Now, this is the only case where I sometimes use sandpaper the exact size of the disc holder, because I don't want that extra over there if I'm getting a nice concave on a foot with a smooth finish, a nice sharp edge. I don't want to dull the edges or make them wavy. So that's what I do with that. Everybody should have or make one of these. It takes the work out of cutting your sheet goods, your standard sheet sandpaper, into the sizes that you want. You put the sandpaper in there and you rip off the sizes that you want. These are readily available. Rockler makes an all metal one that is really nice. It's really nice. This one I've had laying around for almost ever. If you are lucky enough to know a dentist whose father was a dentist, whose grandfather was a dentist, who is now retiring, as I have been lucky enough in the last month, you might be able to come up with some old items out of a dentist's office that are really handy. And this is a little puffer. It blows just a little bit of air. Nowadays when they're drying that tooth, they dry it with compressed air coming out of those multi-million-dollar gadgets they have there. In the old days, they did it like this. And if you have little, you'll have little wormholes in ambrosia. You get a lot of them, and you want to clean that out. Put that in there, puff it a little, it'll clean it out. And every well-dressed sander needs a big old eraser. You can triple, quadruple the life of your sandpaper if you have one of these, because you can clean it and get at least 2 or 3 more uses out of it. So I have one of these when I'm sanding. I have one of these laying on the lathe bed all the time. I'll pick it up, I'll run the drill real slow and wipe it over there, and it'll clean it up, and and make it nice. Now, you have to remember you can only do that so long because 100 grit will eventually become 120 if you're sanding and sanding and sanding with the same piece of sandpaper, which will eventually become 150 if you keep going. Don't do that. When the sharpness is gone in the sandpaper, it is time to be rid of it and take a new piece. Use sandpaper as if someone else is buying it. Questions?
Larry, in reference to cleaning sandpaper, I've used a foul brush already, which is, just real fine wire.
Yeah?
Or on the other side of them, there's a regular stiff brush.
Yeah?
And that seems to
Does that work? I have one of those, but I never thought about using it.
Yeah, particularly on your low number.
Yeah.
Papers.
Sad day.
Like if you have say you have a finish on something and you want to take it off, okay, right away they get heaped up on you.
Sad day when we don't learn something. I am not going to do a lot of sanding tonight, actual sanding. I had hoped that this would be, a warm fall evening, about 75 degrees out there, sunny, or at least not raining, and that we could have the doors open and maybe move the whole operation out there. Obviously, we can't do that. So all I'm going to do is briefly show you some of the tricks that I've learned. This is a beautiful piece of ambrosia that I actually got from Rod, and this is a demo piece, but it's going along home because it's going to get finished. Now this was cut. This was a round cut, so that you're going to have straight grain, and you're going to have some end grain in it. And unless you are very, very, very good in this kind of wood, and I'm not that good, in this kind of wood, you're going to get a little tear out. If you get it there, you will get it over here on the opposite side. And that's the first thing you have to deal with when you're sanding. You want to get rid of that tear out. So, let me get a piece of 100. I had a piece of 100 out. I don't know why I put it away. Put this on as somewhere near the middle as you can get it. Let's see if this works. Yeah, that works. Somewhere near the middle. See how much I have hanging over? Not to worry about that, because that allows me to flow right up the side. When you're power sanding, you don't do it like this. You always do it on the edge. Now, I have it on the edge there. Actually, where I would be doing it is down here. And if you have a piece with a lot of tear out, or you want to reduce your dust early on at least, you can mix yourself up some water. Mix yourself up some water. I mean exactly what I say. You take a spray bottle of water and put 3 or 4 drops of dishwashing detergent in it. What does that do? It makes water wetter, because that's what soap does. Soap makes your water wetter, and you can spray it down good. You're going to get a little spin off, but you're not going to get a lot of dust. And so when you start, you guys out there are probably going to get a little wet. I already have it set at 800, so that's about how fast it's turning when I'm sanding. You sand exactly the way you turn. You don't go like this, even if you could, which I can't right now with my shoulder. You put the sander, you put your machine against your body, and you move your body Very same way you move a turning tool. Use your body. You don't get near as tired. And if you've had shoulder surgery, you can't move the right arm anyway. Still a little bit of tear out there. I had to do it. Would have to go a little further with that. Now we have to sand this. There's a couple ways we can do that. We can do some of it. We can do some of it with the drill, but we're still going to leave ourselves with a fair bit to do. So this is a perfect place to show you how we hand sand something like this. I forget what grit this was. That's 100 grit. That's fine. That's what I'm using. Now, there's a slight dovetail here because when I turn this around, I'm going to hold it with this chuck. There's a faceplate on here that is being held in the chuck. It's one of those faceplates that, has a dovetail in the rim that you can put on the chuck. I have already measured this, so I know it will go on at the most efficient point on this chuck, which is when the jaws are about 1/8 of an inch apart. I've already done that. So now I can do some hand sanding in here. Getting down in that dovetail area is tricky. So what I do is I pull the edges back a little. When you're hand sanding, you use both hands. Don't do this. Don't do this. My lathe isn't long enough. Support the hand that's holding support your strong hand with your weak hand. Okay, now you'll see I'm going at 7 o'clock because it's easier at this point to go at 7 o'clock for me than it is to go at 5 o'clock. So here I'm sanding at 7 o'clock. Now, that's not bad. You're going to see marks on there. Those are the 100 grit marks. The next one, the 120, is going to take those off and leave some 120 grit marks. And we're going to keep doing that till we get right up to the end. Place you have to be very careful on the foot is right here in the very center. Okay. It's hard to get that little shadow or that little roughness out of there. So every grit, I stop it and rub the center a little bit before I go into the next grit, just so there's nothing showing there. Because I can guarantee you, if you have a little mark there from your tailstock, you have a little mark there from your turning tool, it's the first thing somebody's going to see when they turn it over. You might have signed it with a calligraphy pen and archival ink and have all the fancy curlicues on it and everything, and the first thing they're going to see is that little mark in the center. I promise you. Every time. So get that out. Questions? Okay. Might need some help, Bob. I'm not sure. Oh, I got it. I have to do it essentially with one hand. Incidentally, there's the faceplate that was holding that. And I will take that home with me, and I will finish that as soon as I am able. Now here's what would be a little box. You're going to have to use your imagination, because this would be really deep. But if it's really deep, you're not going to be able to see anything. You're not going to be able to see much as it is. And somewhere on this chuck, I have a mark. Ah, right there it is. I have a mark on there. The reason I did that is so that it'll run relatively true when I put it back in. Yeah, it doesn't run too bad. It's out a little bit. Okay, this is just by way of showing you how I do this. Now, there is another step that you can do to this. You can improve on this if you have any other than just an absolutely smooth curve around the bottom. If you've done some fancy work in there, you go to the local carpet store and you ask them where they brought the underlayment that they're going to throw away from the last carpet job they did. Where is it? And they will likely tell you to go and take all you want. Now, all you want is about 2 square feet, because that's going to do you for the rest of your life. You can cut a little piece of carpet underlayment and put in here, which will soften that. And what you accomplish by doing that is you accomplish this for hand sanding. I meant to bring some, I didn't. So anyway, I hold that like that. May take just a little more of that, and I get her good and tight. Okay? Same speed, or maybe just a titch faster, because now this is not going to be moving very fast. So you might want to run the lathe just a hair faster. I don't want to make that dust. I don't want you guys breathing that dust, and I don't want to breathe it myself. You can also get over here if your shoulder works good. You can get over here and do it at 5 o'clock too, and it'll work pretty good. Now, if I am doing the outside, that thing just came loose. Lee, is that critical? I'll just hang it over there. That'll be fine. If you're sanding on the outside doing spindle work, okay, 2 hands, with me? 2 hands at 5 o'clock. Because I made it wet, I'm loading the sandpaper. I don't worry about that. and just any basic kind of spindle turning that you do. Now, sometimes if you have coves, coves and beads and so on, then you've got to get in there and, you've got to work all around those. Sand them. Don't make a beautiful spindle turning and not sand the beads, because it's hard to get down in the little groove in the corner. Somebody's going to see it. Just as sure as you do that, somebody's going to see it. Now, here's my big old eraser. I'll show you how I do this. And there, I didn't get it all off, but I have a usable piece of sandpaper that I can still get some distance out of. Although, if you figure your cost on these, it's relatively small. There's an outfit, I think it's called ASPA or something like that, that makes the oversized, the blue ones, and I think 50 of those are, I don't know, somewhere around 45, 50 bucks. Their sandpaper is becoming very expensive. So you need to find sandpaper that will work for you, that you like, that does the job you want it to do. And what kind? Whatever kind, flint or aluminum, whatever, all the different ones. Some load more than others. I have a nice batch of Japanese sandpaper from close to 20 years ago. A couple years after I'd started turning, I got a good price on this Japanese sandpaper, and it's been sitting in my basement now for 22, 23 years. If any of you want it, just come by and get it. And incidentally, you're welcome to it. It's free for the taking. One of these days, it's going to go. I did not mention these pads. You're all familiar with these nylon pads, which also work very well. The white ones are ultra fine, and I use these only in finishing. This is the next to the finest one. It's a sort of a light gray, and it's probably 4/0 or close to what would be 4/0, and then you have the green ones and the brown ones, and you get eventually up to the black ones, which are like a wire brush, and I don't have any of those because I don't have any use for those. But these are good, and they are. The nice thing about them is if they get loaded, you can beat them on something and get some of the dirt out of them and keep on using them. I would just mention those. Okay, since I don't think we ought to do a whole lot more sanding, actual sanding, because of the confined space we're in here. We don't have any dust extraction or anything like that, and if Bob would have a relapse, I would hold myself personally responsible for that, and I certainly don't want that to happen. I guess if there are no questions, that essentially is what I plan to tell you. Yeah.
But you go through the different levels, 101.0. How do you know when to switch? How do you know when to go to the next level?
You just learn. You just learn. You know. What I guess one of the stories that was told in in grad school, a monk was polishing a brass statue of Buddha, and he was polishing the brass, and a tourist came by and said, "How do you know when you're finished?" He said, "I'm finished when they come and take it away." Is something similar to that is what happens in sanding. You get a feel for it. You'll know, in other words, if let's say you're at 120, and sometimes some people skip 150. I don't. Go right to 180. I don't. I sand with 150, both on here and by hand. But let's say you do. You go to 180 and you look at it and it looks yucky. Well, clearly you didn't get it smooth enough. You didn't get the you should get the blemishes out at each grit that you want out. Whatever marks or whatever, you should get them out at each grit.
You sort of know when you go on to the next grit that you didn't have them out.
Yeah, you'll know. In other words, if you do 150, you do 180. 180 is pretty good. You go to 220, and suddenly the 150's showing up in there. You got to go back.
I think the secret to that is that light he has on top. And the light
Yeah.
he's wearing on his head. If you really look at, if you took one grit and sanded a piece of wood and put the light on, you'd see it like cornrows. And when that, gets pretty even with the light, and I use the light all the time for that, or you can wet it down. If you wet it down, you'll see the lines too.
Yeah, they'll pop up right away. And incidentally, if you don't want to wet sand, but you still want to do what Bob just said, use denatured alcohol instead of water, because it'll dry up right away. But it will stay wet long enough that you can see what you're looking for. And always remember that when you make it wet, and at home I use a lot of denatured alcohol, because that gives you a notion of what the finished product is going to look like. Not exactly, because it'll depend on the finish you use. Are you going to use lacquer? Are you going to use oil? Are you going to use polyurethane? You're going to use wax. It will, but it will give you an idea of how it's going to look finished. So if you're not happy when you spray it and you look at it, you're not happy with it, do more sanding. It's time to do more sanding. Now, if you really, really, really hate sanding, you're probably going to cut some corners. I don't hate sanding. Everybody told me when I started this 25 years ago, "Oh, you're going to hate sanding." Well, and for a while I did. Until I, sold a piece every now and then and realized that if I have a chance of doing that, it's going to have to be presentable. I can't sell somebody something I wouldn't buy myself. And so I began to become more particular about the sanding, and to the point that now sanding is just another step in the whole operation. I don't even think about it. When I'm finished turning, I go to sanding, and when I'm done sanding, I finish it. And that's that.
What about reversing the lathe in sanding?
The direction?
I can reverse my lathe, and some people probably reverse sand one way.
Yes, or there's another way around that.
Reverse that.
Accomplishes the same end. What you want to be careful of when you reverse your lathe is that your chuck is locked on, because when you reverse your lathe, it's screwing the chuck off. I don't reverse my lathe.
I did once.
Yeah. I never reverse my lathe. I do reverse this. In fact, I sometimes I sometimes reverse it in the same grit, and I sometimes alternate grits. 80 clockwise, 100 counterclockwise, 120 clockwise, 150 counterclockwise, and that works very well. That works very well.
Sometimes I'll reverse a pen, but they're on a spindle.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
right. Yeah, you're good on that. Yeah, you can't. You'll be fine there. It can't come spinning off. There's nothing more exciting. There's nothing more exciting than something coming off it. First, I have just started wood turning. Just started wood turning, and I started wood turning because I had been over at Bill Fordney's, and he was on Lambeth Walk at the time, and there was a little bitty shop he had out back there, and he had a lathe that took up the whole one side of it, and I'm watching Bill working over there. We've been friends. I've known Bill for a long time, and I'm looking at that, and I think, that looks like fun. And one of these days, I'm going to retire, and I ought to have something to do that I can actually enjoy doing. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll try this. So I bought me a Craftsman lathe. In fact, I think I had 3 before they kept bringing me one to replace the one that wouldn't work. And anyway, I have this set up down in the basement, and I have I didn't know what turn. I just took a log, and it was about that long, and I jammed it on that end, and I jammed it on this end, and I turned it on. Fortunately, I wasn't standing right in front of it, and that sucker came out of there, went over my back, and those of you who have been in my basement know how wide it is, and it hit the block wall clear on the other side behind me. And, of course, the door opened. Is everything all right down there? Oh, everything's just fine.
Every day of the week.
Yeah. So, I think I've come a long way since that, although I'm still not brag. I mean, I still have a lot to learn. close to 25 years, and there's not a day at the lathe I don't learn something. And the day that I don't learn something at the lathe is probably when I give it up. Every piece is unique. Everything you do is unique. Now, if you're a production turner, and I can't imagine a fate worse than being a production turner. Although production turners, I mean, I admire them. I admire their ability to stand there and make table leg after table leg after table leg and not go crazy. I think I can honestly say that with a couple of exceptions, I have never turned 2 pieces the same. Now, the exceptions are when I try to make one of Bill Fordney's chess sets. And you've got, not only do you have to make 2 pieces the same, but you've got to make 16 pieces the same. I always had to ask him. He's the chess expert. You got to make 16 the same, and that is a true challenge. So not bad mouthing the production turner. I just don't want to be one. I want everything I turn to be unique, and I want my finishes adequate, to say the least. As good a finish as I can get. Doesn't mean they're all perfect. They aren't, because I finished some and I put it's all done, it's all finished, it's waxed, and I put the bright light on it, and I think, oh my God. I see swirls in there, I see marks in there. What is that? Oh, the mic's dragging on the floor. Ooh, okay. Testing, can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, about next I'll step on that and Leo. I don't know. Okay, any more questions? Yeah.
If I start sanding, a lot of times, while I'm sanding, all of a sudden I'll start to read little holes up here, different places.
Little holes in the wood?
Yeah.
What he's talking about are leave soft spots.
Voids in the wood or soft spots. Yes.
It'll be okay, then while you're sanding, then they start appearing. And then
Yeah.
the more you sand, the worse it gets.
Yes.
Soft spots or sap spots.
Yeah, and it goes on and on and on, and it never quits. You can't. Yeah.
Stop, put crazy glue on it.
Crazy glue, sanding sealer. I sometimes coat it with sanding sealer between each grit, and sometimes that doesn't work. Super glue is a possibility. There are some wood hardening products, but they don't work that fast. They're rather slow working, and I'm impatient. When I'm not at the lathe, I'm not happy. So I don't want to sit around and wait. That's why I always use 5-minute epoxy. 3-minute if I can find it, because I am impatient.
Yeah, sometimes,
I want to have it
sometimes I'll
done.
sand the area real good, then put super glue on it, then I'll sand it, the super glue kind of in it, just to fill it all.
Yeah, for soft spots. I mean, yeah, that's right.
Sometimes you can use a block of wood or whatever to sort of help bridge those.
Yeah, yeah.
That way you're not
Right.
following the-
You're not following You're not following. You're sanding absolutely flat, and you're not following that contour and that fault and making it worse because you're standing down into it. And if you're using a soft disc holder, then it really shows up. Because that'll fall down in every time it comes around there. It will simply make it worse.
Yeah, the rings are usually
Yeah,
harder
yeah,
than
yeah.
in between the rings, so.
Yeah. I mean, all is not lost. There are things you can do. Except I have had some of those issues that finally I just said, it's
Fireplace.
burn pile.
Especially if you're doing spalted wood, you'll find it a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of that, so.
Yeah, spalted pecan is famous for that. And I gather up a bunch of pecan usually when we're down in Florida and bring it home. I like pecan. I love turning pecan, but it is notorious for the spalted spots they just almost pop out.
You can stop that before you start. If you know you have software, use a wood hardener that actually soaks into the wood and let it sit long enough to harden through. And
That's right.
eventually that'll solve that
Oh, it's very good.
But you can't wait to do it. You've got to start before you get home.
And that Mimwax wood hardener is very good. But what, you got to give it, 2-3 days?
24 hours.
Yeah, at least.
There's Norfolk Island pine pieces, they're all turned, they're turned this way, not this way. So you're dealing with end grain.
The whole way through.
Top all the way through. So when I start that, I turn it about an inch thick, or bottom an inch thick, and I pour that hardener in there, and then it'll finish like a piece of glass. But if you don't, that end grain just keeps peeling off.
Norfolk Island pine is an art form all of its own. First of all, it is dastardly wood to turn in that it dulls tools in no time at all. You spend as much time sharpening as you do turning with Norfolk Island pine. I mean, there's no question about it. I've only ever turned 1 or 2 pieces of it, and I wasn't happy with my results in any case. Although I think what you did is lovely.
I took a class in Florida just on Norfolk Island pine.
Anyone else?
Steve,
Lloyd?
Larry, what do you have to say about the non-mechanical sanders?
Oh, you mean the inertia and so on? They are fine. They are fine, but they're slow. They're slow compared to this. But they will work. They take patience, and they take a steady hand. I mean, with the inertia sanders and those, that's the little wheel that you put the paper on, and it makes the lathe turn or you turn the lathe very, very, very slowly as you use it, and it spins around in there, and they do sand. My experience with them, and I have used several, I have a couple. My experience with them is that they are slow. When you can buy, you can buy a decent drill. Now you can't buy a Milwaukee for $29.95, but you can buy a Black & Decker for $39.95 that has a pretty nice distance out here for your hand. And I think it's 0 to 1200 is the speed on it, and I think it's $29.95. If I have to choose, between the inertia sander and that would be my choice. Now, some of those inertia sanders are pretty small, so there is something to be said for if you have to get in tight places where this will not go. This won't go in here. Well, it'll go in there, but it'll tear the sandpaper to pieces if I try to use it in there. So the sandpaper will last about 10 seconds, and then it would have to be replaced. And there is a fault in here anyway that will...
You get standing where you don't want it sometimes with like that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But so there is something to be said for the inertia sand and the so-called non-powered ones. And they sell a lot of them, so they must work. I mean, all your wood turning catalogs have them listed. And then there's the ball, There's the hook and loop ball. It has a long handle on, and the handle's wrapped with duct tape or something, and there's a ball on the end, and you cut slices in your hook and loop sandpaper, you fit it on that ball, and you put that ball down in there. Save your money. Stop by the house. I have a couple of them. You're welcome to them. My opinion only. Save your money. They are more trouble than they're worth. And I cannot get a nice, level, even sanding job with them.
Larry, do you use the rings more than the pendant and dovetails or...
It depends. No, I use them. I use about 50-50. But generally speaking, the bases of my pieces wind up like this, whether I've used a tenon or not, because I like. And what will happen here is, in the end, this will not be so pronounced. In the end, this will be sloped in slightly and will virtually become part of this. In some cases, I make this very shallow, and so you don't even see that I held it at all back here when it's finished. But I left this way because I wanted to show you how with my hands, how I had to get down in here, to sand that dovetail. I wouldn't worry about sanding that dovetail under normal circumstances if I'm going to remove this. Now, in this case, I may not be able to remove it all because that's going to it's going to make my foot, that much wider, and so my proportions are getting my third, the rule of thirds? Well, I'm getting beyond my rule of thirds. So the foot will be too big, is what I'm saying, for the kind of design I like. But you don't have to like the kind of design I like. Nobody does. It just happens to be what I like. You do what you like. And if you are happy with it, it shouldn't matter to anybody else. Unless you're trying for customers. But I don't seem to have any customers anymore anyway. Except for threaded acorn boxes. I'm getting a little sick of threaded acorn boxes. Bill and Barb helped me in Florida 2 years ago. I had 10 or 12 to make, and they helped with that, and that was fine. Everything worked out. And then, the Japanese came over here to visit. Chambersburg has a sister city over in Japan. and they came over, and so they wanted a gift for them, and guess who drew the short straw? They wanted something local, like an acorn box with a threaded lid. And I said, how many? They said 30 are coming. We'd like to have 35. And something I don't understand. 30 came. I gave them 35 acorn boxes, and 5 are unaccounted for.
Who was running the program? You know where they went. By the way, one quick thing, Bill. You're going to be getting a phone call. We gave your name out Sunday. There's a gentleman who has a really old bead for Catholic Church. I'm trying to.
Oh, rosary.
And it was his great grandfather's. It was wooden, and 2 of the beads.
I have a feeling you're not.
I will thank you eternally for that.
I said to him, I said, I can tell you one thing. You better have your checkbook out. Because he's going to turn about 300 before he gets the money mark.
And you're gonna
get a phone call.
And you're gonna pay for them too. Yeah. Somehow he has to make up what he lost on the good father's rosary.
The worst part about those is that you've got to make them basically perfectly round.
Right.
Well, now you
But
know how to do it.
they're only 3/8 of an inch in
Well, I
diameter.
knew Barb could do the jewelry part of it.
Yeah. So if one of them comes off your lathe and runs on the floor, it's perfectly round. It rolls somewhere forever. You don't find it till 6 months later when you sweep it up somewhere.
Bob
Oh,
Dennis
hell,
was
here's-
talking to the guy, and
here's
he
your
said to
rosary
Bob, he said, can you turn beads? And Bob said, not on your best day. You know, little beads. And he says, but there's a guy in our club. We gave him the website and had your name and number on it. So you may hear from him.
Specializes in rosary in turning rosary beads. Yeah.
Gotta stop answering the phone now.
Yeah.
Boy, that was a chore.
Oh, it was. I know you worked.
Yeah. He made enough on that he could.
Then this guy says to me, there's, I don't know, 50 brothers in the order. And once they see this, they're all going to want one. No way in this world am I turning 50 rosaries. I mean, there's like 70 or 80 beads on
I
a
remember when you
rosary.
brought it
Yeah.
up. It was
No
unreal.
way am I turning all those.
Well, David taught you how to do that now.
Never happened. No, never happened. Well, that's like the acorn boxes. I'm about done with acorn boxes, and particularly threading. Threading, although those acorn boxes is something else. I mean, you've got to measure so carefully. Well, I thank you all. If there are no more questions, I appreciate your attention.
Happy birthday again.
Oh, thank you.
Happy